بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نرحب بكم جميعا في هذه الندوة التي ينظمها مركز دراسة الإسلام والديمقراطية بالتعاون مع مركز الدراسات المغاربية بتونس سيمات. أشكركم على التعاون. وإيمز أيضا المؤسسة الأمريكية للدراسات المغاربية. ونحن سعداء باستضافة الأستاذ مارك لينش، وهو أستاذ في جامعة جورج واشنطن في العاصمة الأمريكية في واشنطن، ومن الخبراء الباحثين في موضوع الشرق الأوسط، ويعني طبعا هو من أهم الأساتذة ومن أهم الباحثين والخبراء في الشرق الأوسط في أمريكا وفي واشنطن يعني بالتحديد. وموضوع الندوة اليوم هو سياسات الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية تجاه منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا بعد الربيع العربي. يعني ال5 سنوات الماضية سيقيم لنا الأستاذ مارك لينش العلاقات الأمريكية، كيف تنظر أمريكا إلى المنطقة وإلى التحولات التي صارت وتصير في المنطقة. إذا نرحب بكم جميعا ونرحب بالأستاذ مارك لينش، وأنا سعيد جدا باستضافتي في مركز الإسلام والديمقراطية في تونس. مرحبا بك.
شكرا جزيلا رضوان، شكرا جزيلا لكلكم. هذا فرصة مهمة بالنسبة لي، فرصة لأتكلم مع كلكم عن السياسة الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط. طلب رضوان أن أنا بحكي بالإنجليزية في هذه المحاضرة، ولكن بعد ذلك أنا أسمع إلى كل أسئلة بالعربي وبحاول أتكلم بالعربي في المناقشة بعد المحاضرة. So, you ready? Okay. لا بالإنجليزية. Okay. So, American policy in the Middle East is something which I think arouses a great deal of emotion, of confusion, and of interest. And this is understandable because the United States has an enormous impact on the region, for better or for worse. My position in the United States is one where I occupy multiple positions at the same time. I'm a scholar. I'm a professor of political science, and I've written many books and articles about the Middle East and about the politics of the Middle East itself. Not about American foreign policy, but about the politics of Arab countries, of the Arab Spring. I've written a great deal. But I also, because I live in Washington, I am very familiar with the policy process, with the politicians, with the policy community, with the think tanks, with the administration itself. And I feel that I perhaps understand the thinking of President Obama and his advisors about the Middle East. And what I hope to do today is to explain from both a scholarly perspective and from my own unique perspective how President Obama and his team thought about the Arab Spring, about Tunisia, and about the entire Arab Spring, and explain what he was trying to do with his policies, what succeeded and what did not succeed, and how this ultimately will change America's position in the Middle East. And then I will say a little bit, actually no, I'll say a lot, about the election which is coming, and what you might expect from Hillary Clinton or from Donald Trump as the next president of the United States, and how each of them views the region, how they think about the Middle East, and what they are likely to do should they become president. So let me begin by saying that the United States has, of course, quite a long history with the Middle East. And over that history, it has had a number of quite clear interests and quite clear priorities. How it has understood what is important about the Middle East and what matters to the United States. Those interests are not a mystery to any of you in the room. They are quite well known. And importantly, extremely importantly, They have largely been shared by both Republicans and Democrats. They've continued over a long period of time. And generally, they have a great deal of support at both in Washington and in the country more broadly. There's a great deal of consistency in American foreign policy. Every new president, every single one, comes into office saying that he will change everything about America's policy in the Middle East. And every single one fails to do so. Because there's a structure around this, a structure of American policies in the Middle East, allies in the Middle East, interests in the Middle East, limits to America's power to act in the region and its ability to change things, and a whole set of forces which again and again pull American policy back to the same basic approach to the region. This was true of George W. Bush, it was true of Barack Obama, and it will likely prove true of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Each president begins with promises of a new beginning. Each president promises to change. Each president criticizes everything the former president did and promises to be different. And in the first 6 months, they try and pursue a new policy. It fails. And then they revert back and they're pulled back into the status quo. So what is that status quo? What can we expect from this long history of American involvement in the region? And what can we expect will actually change? So first, the history. The interests that the United States has traditionally identified in the Middle East, as I said, are not mysterious. Number one, and most important, is access to oil. This has been the overarching reason why the United States is interested in the Middle East. Maintaining, not controlling oil, not going in and invading and controlling the oil directly, but ensuring that the oil flows predictably, regularly, and that no geopolitical rival can prevent the oil from flowing. From 1945 onward, the end of World War II, this has been the most important American interest in the Middle East, and every policy that it has taken has been designed to ensure that it is able to guarantee the flow of oil from the Middle East. This is important not only for the United States and its economy, but because this is what guarantees to all of its alliances, the entire international capitalist economy, that it will continue to be able to have access to the energy of the Gulf. Oil is number one. Number two is that the United States has been committed to the security and survival of the State of Israel. And this has been perhaps not an interest which was dictated by the structure of the international system, but it is one which has commanded widespread support across American public opinion and has been unchanged since the founding of the State of Israel and even before. Every American president has been as equally committed to the survival and security of the State of Israel as to the flow of oil. Those two interests are enduring and will endure. After World War II, there was a third vital national interest identified by the United States, and that was to fight the Soviet Union and to prevent communism from spreading through the Middle East and to fight a global Cold War against the Soviet Union. This, of course, ended in 1990 when the Soviet Union collapsed, and this global war against communism no longer commanded American interest. But rather than simply leave the Middle East after the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States then moved to a new conception of its national interest, which is extremely important and perhaps not understood as well as it should be. That interest was to establish an American-led regional order. A regional order which is based upon American leadership and in which the United States became the only great power, the only external great power capable of leading the region, resolving conflicts, and steering the region. The United States, after 1990, aspired to be the regional hegemon. MENA was something important. It replaced the Soviet Union as our understanding of what the Middle East should look like. Now, in order to maintain this hegemony, the United States, of course, needed to do different things than in the past. But I want to emphasize that this did not change the primary interest in oil and protecting Israel. The reason that the United States wanted to lead a regional order was because it wanted to pursue those interests. They come first. There's a fourth set of interests which have emerged over the last few years, which are added to this. This is something basic and primary to any country in the world, protecting the homeland from physical threats. In this case, it means terrorism, the proliferation of nuclear weapons to Iran. All of it should be understood as the ability of people in the Middle East, actors or states, to inflict physical harm on the American homeland. Protecting the American homeland from terrorism, from nuclear weapons. This was a fourth interest, which then became an extremely important one, as you all know, as time goes by. Now, you'll notice that in this list of interests, with all due apologies to the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy, I did not mention the spread of democracy. This is because democracy has never been a primary interest of the United States in the Middle East. This does not mean, as many people would argue, that the United States does not want democracy. The United States would like very much for the states of the Middle East to be democracies. Almost everybody in the United States, in policy circles, believes that democracies are superior to non-democracies, that the United States would be better served by having allies and friends who are democratic, and that the American-led regional order would be more stable and more secure if it was populated by democracies. Most American policymakers believe all of those things. What they do not believe is that those have a higher priority than oil, Israel, protecting the homeland, or guaranteeing American primacy in the region. They don't oppose democracy, they simply don't believe that it's more important than those other things. Now, over time, the way the United States attempted to pursue these interests that I've described has changed significantly. The interests have not changed, but the mechanisms, the policies to achieve them have changed quite a lot. Prior to 1990, the United States primarily tried to pursue these interests from afar, without a direct military presence, by working with local allies and using those local allies to protect its interests. It had a strong alliance with Iran under the Shah, with Israel, with Turkey. It sought to have powerful allies who could protect Israel, keep the oil flowing, keep the Soviet Union out. After the fall of the Soviet Union, however, this began to change, and the United States began to introduce military forces into the region directly in a fundamentally new way. The turning point, as you all know, was Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, when the United States responded by assembling a large international coalition and using 500,000 forces to liberate Kuwait from Iraq, and used this as the vehicle for establishing this new American-led regional order that I described. Now, because Saddam Hussein was not removed from power in 1991, and because the United States continued to view Iraq under Saddam Hussein as a threat, the United States did not withdraw its troops after 1991. It relocated them out of Saudi Arabia, but it could not remove them completely. Why? Because there was no regional power capable of doing what needed to be done from an American point of view. The first Clinton administration, perhaps the last Clinton administration, but the Bill Clinton administration decided that protecting the flow of oil from the Gulf required maintaining the containment of both Iraq and the Islamic Republic of Iran. It needed to contain both of them. But who could do that? Saudi Arabia was rich but weak and completely unable to balance Iraq or Iran militarily. Turkey was distant and uninterested, and there was no other power capable of doing this. And so the United States established a network of military bases, which it hadn't had before, and it used these to contain the Islamic Republic of Iran and to enforce sanctions on Iraq and to maintain a series of no-fly zones in Iraq, which required regular, active, and constant military presence and action. And the entire decade of the 1990s witnessed the dramatic and near-permanent introduction of American military forces into the Gulf. That was all to prevent the flow, to keep the flow of oil. What about Israel? Well, it was inconvenient for the United States that it was trying to be an ally to the states of the Gulf and to Israel at the same time. Because, of course, Israel and the Arab states of the Gulf were enemies. And so the peace process, which began in 1992, designed to bring about a Palestinian state, ultimately, the Oslo process, was a way to make this American-led regional order work. It's what allowed it to function. If the United States was actively pursuing peace between Israel and the Palestinians, this could justify an alliance and a regional order which included both Israel and the Arab states. And so the peace process was an extremely important, a vital part of this American conception of a new regional order. And throughout the 1990s, as you recall, the United States both contained Iraq and Iran through direct military presence in the Gulf and actively oversaw the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. At no time in this period, this is important, again, if you're studying democracy, did the United States attempt to spread democracy in the Middle East? Because democracy was not viewed as important for either of these objectives. Most of Arab public opinion was hostile to Israel and much of it opposed the peace process. Democracy would have empowered those voices. And much of the public opinion in the Middle East was opposed to this new alliance with the United States and would have complicated things. Where there were signs of democracy, such as in Algeria in 1991 and 1992, when the Islamic Salvation Front won elections, the United States and its Western allies expressed a preference to see a return to military rule rather than to see democracy succeed. And I think this is a clear statement, and it's a clear sign of how the Clinton administration in the 1990s prioritized its interests. And democracy was not one of those interests. When Clinton left office in 2000, he was replaced by George W. Bush. George W. Bush ran his election campaign on a promise to reduce American footprint in the Middle East. He promised to stop trying to nation build, to stop getting involved in military interventions abroad, and to reduce this American commitment to the Middle East. Nobody remembers this. The reason nobody remembers this is because, like every president, his campaign met reality. And reality, it turned out, did not allow him to escape from the Clinton administration's overseeing of the Middle East. But different things happened. And the most obvious thing which happened was the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Al-Qaeda's attack on the United States on September 11th transformed how the Bush administration viewed the Middle East and led him and his administration to abandon almost everything which they had said during the election campaign. The Bush administration concluded that the Middle East, which the Clinton administration believed was doing a very good job of protecting American interests, actually was not. And that instead, it was necessary to radically change the Middle East. That it was going to be necessary to radically transform the Middle East. Why? Because the attack on the American homeland, in the view of the Bush administration, proved that the regional order of the 1990s had left America vulnerable and weak, and therefore it needed to be changed. It needed to be changed in two ways. First, the global war on terror, the freedom agenda. All of these were designed in the Bush administration's thinking. They were designed in order to fundamentally change your societies, to fundamentally change what he considered to be the roots of extremism. Autocracy, authoritarian rule, despotism. These things produce extremism and terrorism, and so he spoke of spreading democracy as a way of fighting extremism. But he also carried out everything you know of as the war on terror. Military interventions abroad, the various increase in state surveillance and Guantanamo, the whole set of things that you all know very well from the 2000s. All of it, and this is the thing I really want to emphasize, this was in many ways the first time in the entire history of American foreign policy in the Middle East since 1945 that the United States had attempted to change the internal characteristics of Arab states. Nobody else had done that before. And now Bush attempted to do so. The other change that he believed was necessary was to change the balance of power in the region. And the occupation, the invasion and occupation of Iraq was meant to shatter the status quo, to shatter the regional order, and thereby allow a new order to begin. Now, this was, of course, rife with contradictions, as you all know, both the domestic and the regional. The domestic, the idea of the freedom agenda of spreading democracy, did not last very long, because it turned out that, number one, American allies in the region had no interest in becoming democracies. They enjoyed remaining in power, and they had no interest in sharing that power. And so they refused to allow genuine democratization. But also, when they did allow genuine elections, who won the elections? The Islamists. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in the 2005 Egyptian election, Hamas in the 2006 Egyptian election, Egyptian, Palestinian, yes, Hamas won in 2006, and this was a shock to the Bush administration, which had believed that democracy would empower liberal forces and was not willing to take the risk that democracy would turn Islam into democracy. It wasn't a risk he proved willing to take, and from that point on, he largely abandoned his efforts to spread democracy in the Middle East, in all but words, and even in words. At the regional level, the invasion of Iraq was supposed to be easy, fast, and then the United States would withdraw and leave behind a pro-Western government, which would then serve to balance Iranian power. This was the thinking behind the invasion of Iraq. Saddam Hussein would be overthrown, a friendly government would be put in place, and then Iraq would serve the role of balancing against Iranian power, thereby allowing the United States to withdraw from the region. As we know, it didn't quite work that way. It turned out, instead, to be a long, bloody, and extraordinarily difficult occupation, which in many ways disrupted and destabilized the entire Middle East. Most Americans today believe that the invasion of Iraq was the worst strategic mistake in the history of post-World War II foreign policy. I certainly believe that. And when you look at what happened in Iraq, it accelerated many of the negative things that the Bush administration had originally diagnosed. With Iraq in shambles, there was nobody to balance Iranian power. The more democratic that Iraq became, the more that it became aligned with Iran, rather than serving to balance against Iranian power. And the longer the insurgency continued, the more impossible it became for the United States to withdraw its forces from Iraq. So the great irony is that the Bush administration came in 2001, determined to reduce America's presence in the region, and instead saw the radical, unprecedented expansion of America's role in the region. It then tried to transform the region and failed, and found itself going right back to essentially a policy of dual containment, where it was simultaneously occupying Iraq and trying to balance Iranian power. The Bush administration attempted to salvage the occupation of Iraq with the so-called surge of 2006 and 2007, where it introduced even more American troops into Iraq to try and defeat al-Qaeda and to defeat the insurgency in Iraq. And it achieved a temporary tactical success, but at the cost of leaving 150,000 troops occupying Iraq at the time of the end of the Bush administration. This then brings me to Obama. When Obama began his presidential campaign, when he began his administration, he, like every other president, began by opposing everything which his predecessor had done. Obama ran for president against the Iraq War. He defined it as a great mistake and vowed to end that war. He vowed to withdraw American forces from Iraq. The Bush administration had completely ignored the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and Obama promised to restart Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and to bring about the creation of a Palestinian state. The Bush administration had been heading towards war with Iran. Obama promised to try and bring about an agreement, a diplomatic agreement with Iran on nuclear weapons. And Obama promised to stop the freedom agenda, to end this attempt to spread democracy in the Middle East, and instead begin, as I'm sure you all remember, in the famous Cairo speech of 2009, a new beginning based on mutual interest and mutual respect. The idea was to have a new partnership with the peoples of the Middle East, but not to try and fight a war of ideas, not to spread democracy, not to transform the region. All of this was designed, and here I want to go back to what I said before. None of this was a change in his conception of American interests. That did not change. He still believed, as every American president did and will, that the flow of oil was important, that protecting Israel was important, that maintaining American leadership was important, and that protecting the American homeland was important. But he believed that this was best done through a dramatic reduction in American presence in the Middle East. Quite ironically, the exact same thing that George Bush had said in 2000. Except this time, Obama tried to actually do it. He began by focusing on withdrawing from Iraq, and he succeeded. By the end of 2011, all American troops had left Iraq. This is one of the very few times that an American presidential campaign actually kept its vows. He promised to get out of Iraq, and he did. He promised to restart Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, and he did. They failed completely, but he tried, and he paid a fairly significant political price for doing so. He promised to achieve a nuclear deal with Iran through diplomacy, and he did. And last 2 years ago, the nuclear deal was signed and has been implemented since. And this was the third of his major commitments, and he delivered on it, which again is quite remarkable if you consider the general track record of American presidential campaign promises. Finally, he promised to reduce America's presence in the Middle East. Here, he has not succeeded. And here is where the great change began, and here is where I think the interest of many of you really enters the picture. And this is the Arab Spring, the Arab uprising, which was completely unexpected, came as a surprise, and opened up for Obama a genuine change in his thinking about what was possible and desirable in the Middle East. Prior to the Arab Spring, Obama downgraded democracy. He did not believe that creating democracy in the Middle East was possible. And he especially did not believe that imposing democracy by force, as Bush had done, was desirable or possible. He was happy to speak with moderate Islamists like MENA and the Muslim Brotherhood in ways that Bush had not been. But he was not willing to push for genuine democratic change. When the revolution began here in Tunisia, it took everyone by surprise. The Obama administration looked at this, and it had to try and understand very quickly what was happening. When it spread to Egypt, one of America's most important strategic allies in the region, it had to make a decisive choice between democracy and values and its 30-year history of alliance with Hosni Mubarak. And here I think there's something which is widely misunderstood in the Middle East. The Obama administration, unlike every previous administration in the United American history, decided to try and support democracy in 2011 and tried to align itself with the Arab Spring. If you remember, although none of you do, I imagine, his speech at the State Department in May of 2011, he declared the United States he apologized for decades of support for authoritarian government, promised to align the United States with the forces of change, with the youth protesters, with democracy, and declared that he wanted the United States to be, quote, on the right side of history, which he clearly viewed as the side of democratic change. Why would he do such a thing? Why in the world would he align himself with the forces of democratic change, going against 30 to 50 years of American diplomatic tradition? The reason was, I believe, that he saw the Arab Spring coming from below as something which was an internal movement, not something imposed from the outside, which should be supported rather than opposed, and which, in his view, was unstoppable. This is key to understanding Obama's thinking. When people asked him in early February 2011 to save Hosni Mubarak, he understood correctly that America could not save Hosni Mubarak. The Egyptian people had risen up, millions of people were in the streets demanding that Hosni Mubarak leave, and America could not stop that. And he understood should not stop that. In early 2011, he believed that the forces of change were unstoppable, and that it was therefore necessary to find a way to align American interests with the spread of democracy. And where he had the chance to do so, in Tunisia and in Egypt before July 2013, I believe that the Obama administration showed a remarkable commitment to democratic institutions, and to the democratic process. Even when, in the case of Egypt, virtually everybody inside of Egypt had given up on the democratic process, the United States remained committed to trying to see its success. This was, I think, something for which he does not get nearly enough credit, either at home or in the region, for the obvious reason that it failed. But the failure, I think, is not a reason to forget the remarkable efforts that were made to see its success. Why did it fail? Well, the reasons are diverse. There are many. I'm happy to talk about any of them in the discussion, except about Tunisia, because it would be very foolish of me to lecture Tunisians about their own politics. But what I will say is that the fundamental problem, which goes across the entire region, not specific to any one country, is that none of America's allies in the region agreed with Obama about either the desirability or the possibility or the inevitability of change. Every government in the region, every regime in the Middle East wanted to see the defeat of the Arab Spring and wanted to ensure that it would not succeed. And this put the Obama administration in direct conflict with all of its allies in the region. And it found itself fighting political wars in Egypt, in Yemen, in Libya, in Yemen, I already said Yemen, across the region. On almost every major battle, the United States found itself working against its allies rather than with its allies. The Arab states of the Gulf and the old regimes within those states wanted to see democracy defeated, or they wanted to see democracy shaped in such a way that they would be returned to power. Whether we're talking about Jordan, or Morocco, or Egypt, or Yemen, this was how the regimes of the region approached the Arab Spring, and they did whatever they could to make that happen, whether it meant direct military intervention, in the case of Bahrain, where they sent military forces directly in to crush the mobilized population, whether it meant working within the process, as in Egypt, or whether it meant supporting friendly regimes in places like Morocco, Jordan, or Kuwait. This came to its culmination with the military coup in Egypt in July 2013, when the military overthrew the elected president, and with the support of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, and the United States was unable and unwilling to work to reverse that coup. At that point, I think it is fair to say that America's support for democratic change had come to an end. They tried, they failed, and thus they moved on to focus on other issues. What were the other issues? You know the other issues. Syria, the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the Middle East. Obama approached Syria through the lens of Iraq. He looked at the calls to intervene in Syria, and what he saw was a direct path to reintroducing an American military presence in the Middle East. The thing which he knew would destroy his attempts to draw down in the Middle East.
Sorry, please slow
Yes.
down a little bit.
I'm sorry, I'll slow down. Oddly, that's exactly what we said. Okay. Okay. Obama was determined to not intervene in Syria, not because he supported Bashar al-Assad, and not because he was unaware of the scale and scope of the atrocities committed by Bashar al-Assad, but because he believed that American military intervention would be disastrous. That small interventions, like a no-fly zone, would fail, and that would then lead, inevitably, to the introduction of American forces on the ground, which he believed would be a disaster for Syria and for the United States. You cannot understand American policy towards Syria unless you understand that avoiding another Iraq was one of Obama's most important priorities. Obama also understood, in my view correctly, that militarizing the uprising would be a disaster, that an armed insurgency would lead to a protracted civil war which could not be won, which would have tremendous humanitarian consequences, but could not lead to the creation of a stable and democratic Syria. I believe he was right. I was against the arming of the opposition, I was against military intervention in Syria, and I still believe that that was correct. But he could not prevent his allies from doing the same. And I think we see the consequences in Syria today of a proxy war, in which Russia and Iran and Hezbollah support Assad, and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and everybody else supports the rebels, and the war will continue without end. And this is an absolute tragedy. We've seen the emergence of Daesh, of the Islamic State. We've seen 500,000 dead. We've seen 12 million refugees. And we've seen the destruction of Syria as a state. And I think that this is going to shape the future of the Middle East in every way in the years going forward. The war in Yemen is also an absolute disaster. A year and a half of bombing which has destroyed the infrastructure of the state, created refugees, destroyed the country. Nowhere is there an end in sight. The war in Libya has destroyed that state and left what you all live with on your own border. In all of these cases, what Obama has found is that his attempts to withdraw from the Middle East have failed. Obama is now fighting 5 wars in the Middle East after promising to end America's wars in the Middle East. Obama hoped to bring about democracy. Democracy has failed. And Obama hoped to withdraw America's footprint. And now America is in many ways more present than it ever was before. However, he did get the nuclear deal. And that has a chance to fundamentally transform the region. Let me quickly move to the legacy Obama leaves to the next president. Let me talk about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and what you might expect from either of them. I'm not involved with either campaign, and I don't speak here as a supporter of either candidate. I think that many people believe that the election is already over, that Hillary Clinton has already won, that she is inevitably going to win. I think she will probably win, but I do not put her odds at greater than 60%. Because America is a sharply polarized country, and the Republican candidate will always have a good chance of winning. There's a long way to go. I think that Trump probably has somewhere between a 35 and a 45% chance of winning. So we must take seriously what Trump will do. Hillary Clinton, I think, is known to all of you. She's known to all of us. You will not get many surprises from Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton will look a lot like Obama. I mean, she won't look like him, but her policies will look quite similar. It's important to understand that while Hillary Clinton herself is more hawkish, she is more interventionist, more willing to use military force, more willing to intervene. Those things are true. But she is surrounded by advisors who were the same people who advised Barack Obama and designed and implemented his policies. She is a politician of the status quo. She will continue, for the most part, what Obama has been doing. She is a cautious politician by nature and will not want to radically change the status quo. She will almost certainly begin her presidency by declaring that she will. In other words, she will begin her presidency by saying that America is back, that she is turning the page on Obama's policies and striking out in a bold new direction. She will promise to rebuild America's alliances with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, with the leaders of the region. She will promise to support democracy in ways that Obama did not. She will promise to intervene in Syria and she probably will, bomb Syria and promise a no-fly zone and be more interventionist in Syria. She'll probably do a little bit more in Libya, where she has a deep personal reason for seeing Libya succeed, having been the architect of the Libya campaign. But very shortly, oh, and also she will promise to restart Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. But very quickly, she will find that none of those things are possible. Israeli-Palestinian talks will not succeed. The Syrian war will not be resolved. Democracy will not proceed. And she will find herself pulled back into approximately the same policies that Obama has been following. Drone strikes and limited war against Daesh. Vocal support for democracy, but no real actions to bring it about. Peace talks with Israel and the Palestinians that produce nothing. And a greater American involvement in a Syrian war which does not end. And that is likely what you'll get from Hillary Clinton. Something which looks very much like what we have now. Those who expect a dramatic change are likely to be disappointed. What about Donald Trump? This is more difficult. Donald Trump is not known to all of us. Not just to you, but in the foreign policy community, Donald Trump has no experience. He has no track record. He has no knowledge. He has no real policies and no real opinions. I do not think he knows where Tunisia is on a map. I really don't. He has never been involved in foreign policy before, and so I would not read too much into what he says about details. Whatever policy he announces today will not survive contact with reality because he knows nothing about reality in the Middle East. But he does have some very clear and very important ideas about America's role in the world, which you should listen to and take very seriously. Number one, he believes that the United States' number one threat from the region or in the world is radical Islam and terrorism. He has said repeatedly that he believes that radical Islam is the number one threat to the United States. Not Russia, not Iran, not Syria, not climate change, but radical Islam. And he has promised that he will be an ally to any state which shares his goal of defeating radical Islam. He has a very unsophisticated understanding of radical Islam. He does not understand the differences between Al-Nahda and Al-Qaeda. He does not understand the differences between Al-Azhar University and the Islamic State. He doesn't understand those things. But this is going to be his primary orientation. That matters for how he's going to approach the Middle East. Counterterrorism is going to be far more important than anything else, and this is going to shape what he does. Many people believe that that Trump is like Obama in that he wants to retreat from the Middle East. But Trump's main advisor on foreign policy, General Michael Flynn, calls for a global war against radical Islam, which involves the use of military force wherever radical Islam can be found. Not military occupation, not nation building, not a war of ideas, but military force against radical Islam wherever it might be found. So this is a very expansive but very narrow conception of American interests. It also is important to note, he doesn't really understand the difference between Iran and Saudi Arabia. He doesn't really understand the difference between Sunni and Shia Islam. So it's possible that he might decide that Iran is fighting the Islamic State, and therefore Iran should be a partner against radical Islam. This is possible because we don't know the details. But it is very important to note that when he listed the primary threats to to the United States, he did not mention Iran. And when he mentioned America's most important allies, he did not mention Saudi Arabia. And that's worth listening to and thinking about. Now, what else do we know about him? We know that he does not believe in America's alliances. He believes that alliances are a drain on America's resources. Hillary Clinton believes in alliances. She believes in building and maintaining alliances. Trump believes that alliances should mean that the allies pay their way and give the United States more than the United States gives them. He understands himself to be a businessman and a negotiator. So he does not say, tear up the Iran deal. He says, renegotiate the Iran deal and get a better deal. Israel is extremely worried that he does not seem to value alliances. Saudi Arabia is very worried that he does not seem to value alliances. And I think that everybody in the Middle East has to look and think about what it would mean for him to renegotiate America's alliances in the region. Nobody really knows what it means, but I think it's very important to understand. And then finally, I think it's important to know that because Donald Trump, because of who he is, because people believe him to be a racist and believe him to be an extremist, he has no advisors from the mainstream of the American foreign policy establishment. His advisors are unknown figures with extreme views, which means that the familiar faces that many of you might have seen coming through Tunisia over the last 5 years, those are not the people who will be advising Trump. They're all working for Clinton, which is a very strange development. What this means is that if Trump becomes president, he will be surrounded by unknown figures, and he will be resisted by the entire American state. The entire State Department, intelligence services, Pentagon, foreign policy community, all of them will be working to drag Trump back to the center. All of America's allies will be working to drag Trump back to the center. And the most likely outcome is that Trump's first 6 months will be a confusing disaster. But then, he too will be dragged back to something which looks very similar to Obama and Clinton and George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Structure rather than his personality. So we'll see. Thank you, and I'm now happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. This was one of the really best introductions that I've heard on the U.S. policy as well as on the Middle East and North Africa. I really appreciate it. My first question, since I'm the moderator, I'm privilege of asking the first question, is about democracy, and specifically about Tunisia.
You want to get me in trouble, don't you?
Yes. Why did the United States jump very quickly to the conclusion that democracy has failed, basically in 2 years, or less, 2011 to 2013, when we know very well that democracy takes a lot longer than that to succeed? Isn't that a betrayal of democracy? To say within 2 years that we failed and therefore we give up and we don't follow through the policy. And specifically in Tunisia, where it has not failed. Why did the United States forget or overlook the fact that democracy has not failed in Tunisia? It's still a success, it's still working. It's still work in progress, but it's still working. Why don't we have more interest, more support to Tunisia to make it, or to help it succeed, and prove that democracy is indeed possible?
Thank you, everyone.
Without military intervention.
Thank you, Erdogan. So let me take your second question first. There actually is tremendous love for Tunisia in Washington, because many people in Washington do not want to see the Arab Spring fail, and Tunisia is the only hope that anybody has left. And so there's been a series of think tank reports, State Department initiatives, efforts to support Tunisian democracy. There's very much a desire to see Tunisia succeed, and it's frequently mentioned, and Hillary Clinton specifically has a personal interest in Tunisia and would like to see support from Clinton for Tunisia. But that said, Tunisia doesn't matter very much to the United States. If you go, and the reasons why are rooted in how I presented this talk. What matters to the United States is oil and Israel and regional order. And Tunisia is far from the Gulf, far from Israel, and what happens here doesn't affect those core national interests, except when it involves things like Daesh, terrorism, that sort of thing. So America wants to support Tunisia because it wants a model of successful democracy. It very much wants that. But it does not view Tunisia in and of itself as vital to its national security interests. And so that's why you see what you see on Tunisia. On the first question, which is a very important one, I don't think that Obama himself has given up on the idea of democracy. What was given up on, what he gave up on, was the idea that the United States could make it happen. That the United States could usefully work to continue democratic change in the region. And the reason for this was driven more than anything else by so many things, but I'm only going to name three. The first is the coup in Egypt. The coup, it is impossible to exaggerate the centrality of Egypt to the American policy community and the democracy community. Egypt was the showcase model for the American support for democracy, something which Obama believes, whether you agree or not, Obama and his administration believe that they expended an enormous amount of political capital to try and bring about democracy in Egypt. And that failure, I think, is why they concluded that it was not worth spending that much time and effort and paying such a price. And that brings me to the second reason, which is that all of its allies opposed democracy. And as the region went and descended into war and descended into crisis, the United States increasingly needed those allies. It needed, or it believed that it needed, Saudi Arabia and the UAE to act in Yemen. That it needed Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar to act in Syria. That it needed Egypt and everybody else apparently in Libya. And that comes with a price. If I need this from you, I can't also ask you to democratize. The trade-off simply wasn't there. And that was number two. And then number three is Daesh and the rise of this new form of terrorism, which has become the primary focus of regional policy. And while I believe it's true, Obama still believes that democracy is necessary to combat extremism. The more urgent need is to actually fight Daesh, to fight that war, and he's now prioritizing security over democracy. So those, I think, are the three reasons.
Obama does not see a link between supporting democracy
and
fighting Daesh.
He sees that link, but it's a distant link, and there's more immediately urgent things that need to be done. It's about priorities and sequence. So I think that he believes that Daesh will not ultimately be defeated without democratic systems, but those democratic systems might not emerge for 10 years or 20 years, and Daesh needs to be defeated now. Okay, so I'm going to take questions.
أنا أساساً العالم ولا لو سامي أنا جيت بالعالم.
إن شاء الله.
قلت في المحاضرة أن كل رئيس تكون له أجندة سرعان ما تصطدم بالواقع ويعود إلى المربع الأول. من إذا يصنع السياسة في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية ومن الذي يسيرها؟ خاصة ويعني القوى تنمو باستمرار داخل البيت الأبيض. إلى أي مدى مراكز البحث داخل الولايات المتحدة يعني تستطيع أن تربط الواقع بين الإرهاب وعدم حل قضية فلسطين لمنذ 60 سنة؟ جميع القضايا في العالم يعني تم حلها ما عدا هذه القضية التي تقول في المحاضرة أن حتى الفائز القادم في الانتخابات الأمريكية لن يستطيع حلها. طالما أن هناك يعني قضية فلسطينية لا يمكن للإرهاب أن ينتهي في المنطقة لأنه يتكي على هذا البعد ويعتقد أن دولته التي سيقيمها هي التي ستعيد حق فلسطين. بالنسبة لموضوع
بالنسبة للسؤال الأول أنا
عندي مجموعة من الأسئلة.
ولكن في ناس كثير.
يقول نحن من
السؤال الأول كان من يؤثر السياسة الخارجية الأمريكية ومن يصدر. صح؟ صح؟ والسؤال الثاني عن القضايا الفلسطينية وكيف السياسة الفلسطينية. أوكي. أنا الأول يعني في هناك كثير من المعاملات يعني في الداخل في هناك انتخابات وفي هناك احزاب في هناك يعني كل مركز الدراسات نعم ولكن في هناك اكثر من ذلك يعني في هناك يعني في اجماع واسع في اجماع يعني في كل الاحزاب وفي كل الراي العام في موازن من هذا المصالح. يعني عن إسرائيل في هناك يعني تؤيد واسع لإسرائيل في ديمقراطيين وجمهوريين ولكن هذا تغير في درجات يعني في الحزب الديمقراطي مثلا في هناك يعني كثير من ناخبين برني ساندرز كثير منهم يفضل الفلسطينيين ومش إسرائيل ولكن هذا في المرجع يعني في أظن بشكل عام يعني في هناك يعني دولة في هناك يعني كل State Department, Defense Department يعني المخابرات we don't use that word but the intelligence يعني كل هذا في هناك يعني دولة مستمرة وهذا يعني مصدر المصالح ومصدر السياسة بشكل عام. بيت الأبيض عنده يعني عمليات ولكن كما قلت في كل مرة يحاول أن تغير أساس السياسة الخارجية الأمريكية فشل. كل مرة في حتى بوش حتى أوباما وأتوقع نفس الشيء في كلينتون وترامب. نعم ترامب. أن إسرائيل وفلسطين واضح أن هذا مهم جدا للناس العربي والرأي العام العربي والضمير العربي. هذا شيء مهم جدا وهذا واضح ولكن في واشنطن في هناك فكرة أنا ما بعرف إذا هذه الفكرة صحيحة أو لا ولكن في فكرة أن الآن قضايا فلسطينية ليش الأهم في الشرق الأوسط وسوريا والربيع العربي وكل هذا أهم من القضايا الفلسطينية والناس العربي مش يؤثر مش مهتم بالقضايا الفلسطينية بنفس الدرجة من السابق ولذلك أنا بشوف أنا برى في علاقات جديدة بين السعودية وإسرائيل وبدون أي صدام بين إسرائيل والفلسطينيين ولذلك العدو الإيرانية والخطر الإيراني هذا بدل من القضية الفلسطينية والحرب السورية هذا حرب يعني مؤثر كبير في كل الضمير الناس ولذلك القضية الفلسطينية موجود في السياسة الأمريكية يستمر. في هناك يعني كثير من الناس في واشنطن في مراكز الدراسات في اللوبيز وهم يحترموا على القضية الفلسطينية، ولكن في كيف بقول يعني the order الأولويات، يعني مرتب الأولويات هذا يزداد ينهار مش يزداد ينخفض. نعم هذا الجواب. تفضلي.
Thank you a lot for so I just wanted to say that.
Sorry, can you use oh, he's a better translator.
Okay. So the use of democracy has become such a buzzword, and I feel like mostly in Tunisia it's been kind of used a lot, but I don't feel like people really know what it is. And I think it's a very Western also perspective of what democracy is and what it should be in our region. And it's been the issue for so many years. In Iraq, it has obviously failed because they don't know, they're not aware of the regional, the traditions, the values, the religion, the language that is different. And I think that isn't this kind of one of the reasons why it's failing is because the US is detaining the ultimate truth. This is what I feel like we've been doing for a lot of years, and I think that this is why it's been failing. And isn't it just good for them to leave us alone and just meet the whole region so we can just learn from our own experiences and learn ourselves?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think that Obama himself probably agrees with you. And so, what I mean by that is that he believes that the mistake in Iraq was that the United States came in, imposed democracy by force, and then everything predictably went wrong. And the Arab Spring, or the Tunisian Revolution, came from within, and the Tunisian democracy is not created by the United States. There was a national dialogue of several years which produced a constitution which then created institutions designed to make Tunisia a democracy. And I think for Obama, that is the best way to do it. Every country should follow that model, design their own institutions. But I think he also believes that there are some things.
Sorry, can you just use that mic, please?
Okay. I think he also believes that there are some things which are extremely important. Freedom of the press, the elections, a neutral state, all the things, freedom of assembly. And so he believes those things are important, but he also thinks it's important that countries get there on their own.
Thank you very much, Professor Lynch. Okay, this time I'm going to scare if you don't mind. Okay. لدي سؤالان، تعليقان وسؤال. التعليق الأول قلت نعم. Okay, that's fine. So السؤال الأول قلت يعني كان في remarkable commitment to democratic changes from 2011 to 2013. أنا سأركز على تونس على الأقل. أنا كنت متابعة للشأن السياسي والخارجي بالذات في علاقته بالثورة في تونس وبالمسار الديمقراطي في تونس. لم أرى هذا الكوميتمنت بالشكل الذي apart from public statements, of course. If you consider the public statements, remarkable commitments, that's another question. But if you compare this, for example, تقارن بألمانيا مثلا أو إيطاليا أو فرنسا أو حتى UK. موقفها مثلا من reconversion of debt or anything like that. This is what I really call remarkable commitment. الملاحظة الثانية على سوريا. سوريا قلت أمريكا في كل قياداتها والليدرز تاعها كانت يعني ضد، وخاصة في سوريا أنا أحكي على أوباما بالذات المرة هذه، هو ضد تسليح الثوار وفي نفس الوقت ضد التدخل المباشر. ألم يكن هناك خيار ثالث وأمريكا بما هي عليه الولايات المتحدة من قوة في اليو ان أو في السكيورتي كونسل أو هل ما كان في دور آخر تقوم به الولايات المتحدة؟ السؤال الأهم بالنسبة لي دورها في the coup in Turkey. I like to no. This is we are talking about the Middle East democracy today. So كيف تقرأ التدخل الأمريكي في محاولة الانقلابية الفاشلة في تركيا والدور الذي لعبته؟
في مصر
جوابي صريح لأنه في كل اوكي. اولا ان support يعني اوباما in تونسيا. انا لا استطيع ان اقول يعني تفاصيل العلاقه بين امريكا وتونس لان هذا انا مش متخصص في هذا، وفي هناك ناس كثير في هذا الغرفه الذي تعرف اكثر مني عن الخصوصيه من امريكا الى تونس. ولكن كما قلت سابقا يعني في تونس سهل بالنسبه لامريكا لانه سهل ان في مصر مثلا في هناك يعني في هناك مصالح كبيره و استراتيجيك جيوستراتيجيك وحلفاء ضد الديمقراطيه وكل هذا يعني عن في مثلا مصر هذا صعب جدا. ولكن في تونس في هناك يعني تأييد بشكل عام للديمقراطية في تونس وهذا مهم. يعني values يعني نحن نريد ديمقراطية، نحن نريد يعني نموذج ناجح للديمقراطية في العالم العربي وكل هذا مهم جدا. ولكن هذا ليس في مركز الأولويات والمركز المصالح في الريجن بشكل عام. ولذلك أنا يعني I believe you. يعني ممكن الحجم المساعد ليس بدرجة مناسبة ولكن يعني في هناك تأييد يعني ما أني في السؤال عن تركيا ماذا صعب جدا يعني إردوغان هو يعني حلف وتركي وحلف يعني مهم جدا بالنسبة لأمريكا في كثير من المجالات. يعني في سوريا هو مهم جدا لكل محاولة لمساعدة المعارضة السورية وهو مهم جدا بالنسبة لأوروبا ومهم جدا بالنسبة كثير من الشرق الأوسط. ولذلك هذا مهم. ولكن إردوغان نفسه هو يعني مشكلة بالنسبة لأمريكا لأنه هو عنده سياسات داخلية وخارجية وأمريكا لا يؤيد هذه السياسات مثل الحرب مع الأكراد PKK. هذا هي مشكلة كبيرة. ويعني معارضة إردوغان للإقرار هذا مشكلة كبيرة لأن أمريكا يتحالف مع الإكراد في سوريا وفي هناك حرب مع أسد، حرب مع الإكراد، حرب مع ISIS، داعش وهذا يعني difficult يعني. So أظن في أمريكا في هناك يعني مشكلة كبيرة في تركيا لا يساعد الانقلاب. لا ولكن complex يعني. Okay, so many people. Sir.
أنا ممثل أو مدير مكتب وكالة الأنباء الفلسطينية.
علي شوي الصوت.
أنا مدير مكتب وكالة الأنباء الفلسطينية وفاء في تونس. وأشكرك على صراحتك فأن نشر الديمقراطية بالسلاح لم ينجح، وأرجو أن تنقل ذلك للمفكرين في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية لأننا لم نرى إلا دمار وحروب منذ أن تبنت الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية فكرة نشر الديمقراطية. سؤالي هنا حول قضية فلسطين. لقد تقدمت الدول العربية بمبادرة سلام عام 2002 وأقرتها القمة العربية 2002 المبادرة العربية للسلام وتبنتها أيضا 56 دولة عربية وإسلامية أن الأرض مقابل السلام. وحتى الآن 20 سنة من المفاوضات لم تضغط الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية على إسرائيل التي قلت أن هناك 3 أهداف هو حماية أمن إسرائيل في منطقة الشرق الأوسط، هذا كان واحد منهم. فلماذا هذا التعثر في الإدارات الأمريكية لإقرار سلام في الشرق الأوسط؟ شكرا.
نعم، سؤال جيد، وكما قلت سابقا يعني بوش دار بوش هو لا يهتم القضية الفلسطينية يعني 0%. هو يعني بجانب اسرائيل، وهو لا يهتم اي مفاوضات السلام اي شيء مثل هيك، وهذا مفهوم. والارب بيس انيشيتيف 2002 هذا كان مبادرة جيدة ومبادرة يعني كويس، ولكن انا اعتقد شخصيا لا يوجد أي إرادة للسلام بين إسرائيل والفلسطينيين في هذا الفترة. الحكومة نتنياهو هو ما عنده أي اهتمام في هذه المبادرة أو أي مبادرة أخرى، وهذا مشكلة لأنه على الجانب الفلسطيني في هناك يعني شو اسمه يعني الحل السياسية يعني يعني مقصرة، وفي الدفاع بين فتح وحماس، وفي هناك يعني الشيخوخية مازن، وهو لا يستطيع أن يفاوض ما عنده أي قوة، ما عنده أي استمرار، ولذلك هذا ليس الوقت لأي مفاوضات حقيقية. وأنا أتوقع أن رئيس كلينتون الثاني رئيس هيلاري هي تحاول، هي عندها يعني تجربة طويلة مع مفاوضات السلام بين إسرائيل والفلسطينيين. هي طبعا هي تميل إلى إسرائيل، هذا واضح، ولكن عندها تجربة طويلة مع مفاوضات ويعني two state solution، ويعني تجربة زوجها في التسعينات. أنا أتوقع أنت سترى مفاوضات جديدة ستفشل، ولكن أنا أتوقع محاولة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نشكر الأستاذ. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نشكر الأستاذ على المحاضرة القيمة، ونحب نتساءل إنه هيلاري كلينتون اعترفت أن أمريكا وبريطانيا هما اللي خلقوا داعش، فكيف يعني تخلقون الإرهاب التنظيمات الإرهابية المقيتة، وفي نفس الوقت تدعون أنكم تتدخلون للقضاء على الإرهاب؟ وكيف لدولة مثل أمريكا ومثل قواتها ومعها العديد من الدول ولم تستطع إلى الآن أن تقضي على هؤلاء الدواعش، خاصة وأن نرى أن في ظرف وجيز يعني تحصل هذا التنظيم المقيت الإرهابي على يعني تجهيزات وعلى أسلحة يعني أكثر من عدة دول؟ هذا السؤال الأول. يعني كيف تدعون يعني محاربة الإرهاب وأنتم من تخلقون هذه المنظمات الإرهابية؟ آسفة جدا يعني عندما أتكلم عن السياسيين الأمريكيين طبعا. السؤال الثاني، بما أن كل الرؤساء الأمريكان مشتركين في هدف واحد هو تغيير الشرق الأوسط، ولما بدأت تتحقق يعني الديمقراطية اصطدموا بذلك واصطدموا بالثورات العربية، ونراهم الآن يمولون الثورات المضادة للثورات الأولى لإرجاع حلفائهم القدامى. فهل هل ترى هناك تناقض يعني في السياسة الأمريكية؟ لأن نعلمكم أن كل العرب والمسلمين متفطنين إلى هذا مع الأسف، يعني أصبحت تناقضات واضحة في المواقف الأمريكية، وأصبحت ليس هناك مصداقية. يعني كلما يعني هذا شيء، هل كل الرؤساء الذين يريدون تغيير الشرق الأوسط. في الحقيقة يقصدون أن تهيمن إسرائيل على كل الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا في الحقيقة. يعني أريد يعني جواب. شكرا صريح.
طيب شكرا جزيلا. أنا شخصيا أنا لا أريد أن تطمير الشرق الأوسط. أنا بحب الشرق الأوسط وأنا أفضل أنه يعني ما فيش تطمير، ولكن في هناك يعني مفهومين وأنا أعتقد أنه مهم أن لا يختلف بينهم. في هناك هيمنة وفي هناك يعني صداقة، وأنت استخدمت بعض من الكلمات. وفي هناك هيمنة بمعنى يعني control يعني domination. تعرفي الكلمة domination، وهذا فكرة واحدة من الهيمنة. وفي مفهوم هيمنة الآخر، وهذا فكرة عن يعني قيادة يعني النظام الخلفاء والنظام نظام منطقي زي هيك. وفي هناك فرق بينه. domination يعني control، هذا معنى الذي استخدمت انت. انا
speak in English and
the point is simple. يعني النقطة واحدة. أنا أعتقد أن أمريكا يريد قيادة في الشرق الأوسط، هذا واضح وهذا يستمر على فترة طويلة. أنا لا أعتقد أن أمريكا يريد هيمنة بمعنى عن تطوير domination or control. أظن باعتقادي هذا غلط. وأنا لا أعتقد أن أمريكا يريد يعني سيطرة إسرائيل على المنطقة. أظن هذا كمان فكرة ثالثة. أنا لا أعتقد ذلك. ممكن أنت لا تتفق معي، ولكن هذا فكرتي. عن سؤال داعش داعش يعني هذا يعني منظمة وفكرة، وهذا كمان يستمر على عقود. يعني بدأت في الثمانينات في أفغانستان ويستمر في الشرق الأوسط وفي مصادر كثيرة. في داعش بشكل خاص هذا منظمة، هذا واحد من نتائج الحرب في سوريا. وحرب سوريا هذا يعني يوم القيامة لداعش، وبعد ذلك إلى العراق، وبعد ذلك إلى كل بلد في الشرق الأوسط. ولكن هذا ليس إنتاج أمريكي، هذا ليس إرادة أمريكي، هذا شيء مختلف تماما. هذا كان يعني الاستمرار يعني things from the past. No, it was Ash and Jeremy.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نشكر الأستاذ المحاضر على هذه المداخلة. عندي سؤال مباشر وبسيط. أنا أتابع هذه المداخلة، لم أعرف ما هو شكل الديمقراطية التي تريد الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية أن تفرضها وفشلت في فرضها في المنطقة عبر السياسات أو عبر عقود من الزمان. هذا السؤال، ما هو مفهوم هذه الديمقراطية؟ نحن يعني هذا السؤال. والسؤال الثاني، تحدثنا من خلال سياسات من خلال حديثك عن سياسات الولايات المتحدة تجاه المنطقة، وأشرت إلى سياسة الولايات المتحدة، إلى مصالح الولايات المتحدة، ولكن أغفلت في الحديث مصالح الشعوب. إلى أي حد يمكن أن تلتقي مصالح شعوب المنطقة مع مصالح الولايات المتحدة، وبالتالي يمكن أن يحقق ذلك للولايات المتحدة نجاحات قد تكون قد أخفقت في ذلك، خاصة وأن الديمقراطية التي أنتجت أحزابا، هذه الأحزاب التي وصلت لفترة قصيرة الحكم رأيناها لم تنقلب على الأقل على المنوال الليبرالي أو المنوال الاقتصادي الليبرالي الذي ترسمه الولايات المتحدة عبر نموذج العولمة. وشكرا.
طيب شكرا. أفكر أن يعني السؤال الأول هذا تقريبا نفس السؤال من هذا السؤال، يعني الشكل الذي ذكرته. وأنا عندي نفس الجواب يعني بفكرتي يعني في تونس مثلا يعني الاسلوب والشكل الديمقراطيه هذا تصدر من داخل من تونسيين ليس من امريكيين وليس من يعني فكره او
فيتو امريكي على الديمقراطيه وعلى النتائج الديمقراطيه التي تنتجها الشعوب عندما ينجح حزب اسلامي مثلا نجد الولايات المتحده وحلفاء يضعون الفيتو يعني اذا ما هو هذه يعني نوع الديمقراطيه
مفهوم ولكن ماذا قلت سابقا يعني عندما انتخب محمد المرسي في مصر لم يوجد اي فيتو امريكي سابقا في فلسطين سابقا قبل السيسي أنا كنت I was talking about 2012. For 2012.
عاونت أمريكا السيسي في الانقلاب.
طبعا الكلام ولكن لو اوكي يعني سؤالين يعني عندي سؤالين واحد من يعني إرادة الشعوب والآخر عن الديمقراطية والفيتو الأمريكية. أنا قلت في مصر في 2012 هذا كان مهم جدا لأنه في الجزائر في 92 في فلسطين في 2006 هذا كان فيتو أمريكي واضح ولكن هنا عندما شكل حكومة في تونس بعد الانتخابات ويشمل إحدى ما في أي فيتو أمريكي ما فيش بالضبط هذا كويس ولكن السؤال مهم جدا 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 لانه إرادة الشعوب هذا الشيء مهم جدا لكن تاريخ الشرق الاوسط وكما قلت سابقا طريق الشرق الاوسط كان الطريق الدكتاتوري والطريق الديمقراطي وفي هذه الفترة ليس ضروري لأمريكا أن يفهم أو يعني يريد إرادة الشعب. هذا مش مهم بالنسبة لأمريكا لأنه القيادة، الدكتاتور، المالك، الرئيس، الزعيم هو يعني هو صاحب الخيار. ولكن هذا بعد الربيع العربي هذا تغير وأول مرة يجب أن يستمع إلى الناس العربي، يجب أن يفكر عن أولويات الشعوب وهذا تغير حقيقي ومهم جدا أظن في واشنطن بين 2011 و 2013 هذا كان واحد من أول يعني مواضيع في مناقشة في واشنطن في كل اجتماع في كل يعني ورقة من المراكز الرئاسية كل هذا ولكن وهنا حقوق يعني الانقلاب وطبعا هو انقلاب لا
هذا السؤال
لا أمريكا لا America did not support the coup. أمريكا يعرف الانقلاب وهو واضح ولكن عنده حلفاء في السعودية والكويت والإمارات ولا يستطيع أن يريد كل مساعدة.
لماذا تعاملت مع انقلاب مصر ولم تتعامل مع انقلاب ميانمار مثلا؟
With what?
ميانمار، انقلاب ميانمار يعني قام واحد عسكري
تركيا؟
هذا
هو اللي أنا أكيد الله مش ممكن. Wait. Yeah, okay. I said you're next.
Professor, I totally agree with you about what you say about Tunisia. Tunisia itself doesn't matter for the United States as a country. I said that Tunisia itself doesn't matter for the United States. What matters the most for the United States is the political domination in North Africa, especially in Libya and also in Algeria. For that reason, the United States may use Tunisia as a backstage to fulfill that objective. What do you think about when I said that?
It's an interesting idea and it's possible. I think that's what he's saying. I think that my sense is that Asia and North Africa, Maghreb Urdu, has always been more important to Europe than to the United States for reasons of geography and history. And so the United States has not, in my experience, had a desire to dominate and control North Africa. It has much more interest in the Levant and Egypt and the Gulf, but North Africa has never been a primary interest. I think the military intervention in Libya was a major departure for the United States. This was something very new. And it's been, from an American perspective, a complete disaster. And not something which anybody wants to repeat.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمي فجاه، بارك الله فيك على المحاضرة، كانت طيبة جدا. عندي ملاحظين وسؤال اوكي. الملاحظة انه اعتقد ووافقك وشاكرك الرأي، يعني ان الولايات المتحدة وإدارة اوباما غيرت هناك تغيير جدا في السياسات الخارجية لإدارة اوباما تجاه المجتمع العربي والدول العربية والربيع العربي. هذا واضح وجلي إذا تابعنا يعني سياسات إدارة بوش بالمقارنة بسياسات إدارة أوباما. وأعتقد أن إدارة أوباما تدعم الربيع العربي وتحاول أن، لكن ما يجب من الناحية الإقليمية الضغوطات الإقليمية هي، لكن أرى أن تونس يمكن أن تكون لها دور هام في هذا التغيير الذي تطمح إليه الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، ويمكن أن تكون هناك يعني تقاطع مصالح مهم جدا. إذا خارج الناحية الأمنية محاربة داعش، وخارج الدور السياسي والذي تلعبه تونس حاليا، يعني النجاح يعني النجاح النسبي للانتقال الديمقراطي هو من الناحية الاقتصادية. إذا أخذنا climate change يعني إذا أخذنا الطاقات البديلة والمحافظة على المحيط، وإذا أردنا أيضا أن ننفتح على أفريقيا وأن تكون تونس البوابة الاقتصادية للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية على الدول الإفريقية، وكذلك مع حماية يعني توجه الأمريكي لحماية يعني الطبقة الوسطى تكون هي الطبقة الكادحة والطبقة التي يمكن أن، وهذا يعني في خضم هناك يعني الآن في خضم ما يحدث في الشرق الأوسط. أعتقد أن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية تبحث عن بديل اقتصادي لهذا المجال، وأعتقد أنه يعني الآن يعني البترول وكل هذا أصبح من الماضي، ونستطيع أن نبني اقتصاد جديد مبني على ضوابط جديدة تلعب فيه تونس دور مهم. شكرا جدا.
It's a very interesting question. I have no answer for it. It's just a very interesting thought. I just don't know. I'll think about it.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thank you very much for your lecture. سؤالي هو في صلب المحاضرة التي تتطرق إلى ذكر الإمارات ودورها في إجهاض الربيع العربي، وما موقف أمريكا تجاه الإمارات في هذا يعني التمشي بتاعها ضد الربيع العربي. جزاك الله خير.
سؤال صعب لأنه أمريكا والإمارات في خصوم يعني لا يتفق على الربيع العربي. هذا واحد. في هناك يعني تنافس في مصر في مكان آخر. ولكن في نفس الوقت معظم من السياسيين في أمريكا يعتبروا أن الإمارات هو الصديق الأقرب في كل الشرق الأوسط لواشنطن، حتى ممكن الأردن، ولكن الأردن يعني ضعيف وفقير، والإمارات في هناك فرق مهم بين الإمارات والسعودية. كثير من الناس في واشنطن يرى السعودية كمشكلة وليس حل، ولكن الإمارات هذا شيء آخر.
Isn't Emirate their own? The region?
I wouldn't go that far. No, I think they disagree about Egypt especially. But I think that there generally is very close cooperation with UAE, more so than with other Gulf states. Is my impression. Oh.
I want you to give us specifics. Since there is no translation, I will speak in Arabic. This is regarding Libya. تونس لن تستقر ولن تنجح تجربتها الديمقراطية إلا إذا استقرت ليبيا. وهناك تكامل اقتصادي وتكامل اجتماعي وسياسي موجود. الآن سياسة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، ما هي سياسة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في ليبيا الآن؟ لأنه واضح أن المسألة معقدة جدا. يعني عندما نرى 600 SUV تنطلق من جبل علي، أوكي، وتبحر في البحر وتنزل في سرت بدعم داعش. وإذا قلنا جبل علي، أنت قلت أن الإمارات هي one of the biggest allies أو the most favorite ally to the United States. من جبل علي، من الإمارات، وتصل إلى سرت، إلى داعش. وعندما نرى حفتر عوض أن يحارب الإرهاب والدواعش، حفتر اللي هو يعني ربيب المخابرات الأمريكية وابنها المدلل في وقت من الأوقات. فبالتالي هو الآن ما هي السياسة؟ هي المسألة معقدة جدا. هناك البنيان المرصوص يحاربون الدواعش في سرت بدعم الآن، الحمد لله الآن نستطيع أن نقول بدعم وغطاء من الأباتشيز اللي طلعت من 3 أيام وعملت غطاء يعني جوي للبنيان المرصوص اللي هو حكومة الوفاق الليبية، هي مدعومة دوليا. فهمت كيف؟ فلا الآن ما هي؟ هل هناك سياسة واضحة الآن وقرار نهائي لا رجعة فيه أن الولايات المتحدة من جهة تريد أن تحارب الإرهاب والدواعش، ومن جهة تتغاضى عنهم لفائدة حفتر، حتى يكون هناك دائما مبرر لوجود حفتر في ليبيا؟ فهل هناك سياسة الآن واضحة؟ هل اتضحت الصورة لدى الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية؟
الحمد لله هذا سؤال بسيط. لا لا يوجد أي سياسة واضحة. لا بالعكس شديد.
هل أنتم قادرين توضحوا هذه؟ يعني هل تستطيعون أن تلعبوا دور كمؤسسات كخبرة كدول؟
So their policy, the policy is to support the unity government and to arm the unity government. That's the policy. But nobody in Libya wants to do that. So you have Haftar, you have
But the US is willing to fight terrorism in Libya, real terrorism, and who is behind the terrorism?
Probably not. For all the reasons I said before. They don't want to get more involved and everything.
Can we take the
But terrorism will hurt us in Libya.
Definitely. Absolutely. I agree.
احنا يعني نريد ننتهي ناخذ ال3 أسئلة المتبقية بإجابة، يعني دقيقة واحدة أو نص دقيقة. فقط سيجيب عليهم مع بعض.
نعم. شوف أستاذ، الإجابة على سؤال الأستاذ اسكندر قيم. إجابة على سؤال الأستاذ اسكندر قيم حول عدم وضوح السياسة الأمريكية. عام 1978 انعقد مؤتمر في الخليج حول الجريمة في الوطن العربي.
انا عايشك انا فاضلك نص دقيقه مش باش نرجع. عندك سؤال؟ عندك سؤال؟
I would like to ask you, what do you think that are the main mistakes that Obama has done in the Middle East, especially those that could have been consequential? Because I hear a lot of criticism sometimes in the think tanks saying that he's done a wrong policy, but I don't see many times a specific critique where he could have made a difference. Thank you.
السلام عليكم. عاوز تجاوب براسل يعني صوت متزاوج من البيت. جست صوت متزاوج.
عندك شويه صوت، عندك شويه صوت.
اوكي. يعطيكم الصحة على الندوة ممتازة جدا. جست عفوا سؤالي هو هل تعتقدون أن الولايات المتحدة هي الآن في الحاجة لمن يعطيها دروس في الديمقراطية؟ بحيث أن فعلا هذا ما ذكرتموه يعني تصادم بين المصالح والواقع والحقيقة. فأرجو أنك تجيبني على هذا السؤال.
Welcome, I am Marc from Civil Society. I have two questions. أنا ألم يتعظ رؤساء الولايات المتحدة من إخفاقات سابقيهم تجاه السياسة العنيفة في الشرق الأوسط؟ ألم يتعلم
السياسيين من اخفاقات الماضي واخطاء الماضي.
نعم. كنت منذ قليل أجبت على سؤال لكن أراه السؤال الإجابة غير مقنعة. هناك من يرى أن الولايات المتحدة كانت داعية إلى سؤال يعني هي مزيد التوضيح حول أي معناتها التطرف. ما هو الحل الأمثل للعمل على السلام؟ دور الولايات الآن متحدة في المستقبل بعد التجارب محاربة.
كيف ترون معناتها موقف أمريكا تجاه الجولان موفمنت اللي عندهم، وهل أنهم ترون أنهم سوف يسلمون جولان، خاصة أن نشوف أنه يعني أولا لم يسمون الانقلاب في مصر انقلاب، والكونغرس الأمريكي يحاول أنه جماعة الإخوان المسلمين يعتبرون كأنهم مجموعة إرهابية قاعدين يناقشوا هذا، ونشوفوا أنهم رياض الصالح يعني رياض تو في تركيا. هل ترون أنه هذا كيف ترون أنهم سيتعاملون مع هذا؟
Okay, I'm going to answer these last ones in English so I can do it quickly. On the Gulen movement, the U.S. does not see Gulen as a terrorist and does not want to extradite him, but Turkey is putting tremendous pressure and has made it central demand on the alliance. So I don't know what they will decide. If they surrender him, they've asked for concrete evidence to present to the court. And continue. Yeah. Well, it has to go through the courts. That's the Obama's position. So right now they do not want to extradite, but it'll go through the courts, and that's what Vice President Biden said yesterday. I think the courts will decide. The second, the main mistakes that Obama made. I mean, he's made many mistakes. I think the most, for what we've talked about here. I think the biggest mistakes are supporting or allowing the Saudi intervention in Bahrain. I think that set things in a very bad course. I think that the willingness to accept the coup in Egypt was a major mistake. And I think that the support for the Saudi war in Yemen is a major mistake. Most people in Washington would tell you that the biggest mistakes were getting out of Iraq, not intervening in Syria, and I completely disagree with them. I just think they're wrong. I think Obama was right, and they were wrong. But that's me. On the question of the non-clarity of U.S. positions, I think that this is just part of the reality. The United States does not have clear positions. The same as my answer to Scott. The positions aren't clear, so they can't communicate them. I think that's just the reality. They're torn. Can the U.S. learn from its last mistakes? Obama tried, and that's why he got out of Iraq and didn't invade Syria. And did that work out? See, as I said previously. And then finally, does the United States need lessons in democracy? Let's wait 2 months, and then I'll tell you.
شكرا جزيلا الاستاذ مارك لينش على هذه المحاضره والحوار القيم. شكرا للمترجم ايضا على الجهود الكبيره. شكرا لكم على الحضور. قبل ادعوكم للاستراحه بعض الاجتماعات وربما الحديث خارج المحاضره. فقط اذكركم انه عندنا الجلسه العامه لمركز دراسه الاسلام والديمقراطيه يوم السبت القادم بعد غد